Today, we mourn our dead. Every November 20th, trans people the world over gather to memorialize those who died over the past year. Many events focus exclusively on murder, and along with the dire issue of trans women of color in particular being murdered on a regular basis, both suicide and lack of access to health care are other major killers of trans people. All three, murder, suicide, inadequate health care, disproportionately affect the most vulnerable in a community. The reality is that trans people are more vulnerable than the cis people surrounding them in their daily lives. Learning more about queer issues in the wider world, I've found that suicides are not excluded from the Transgender Day of Remembrance in many other countries. There are a lot of misconceptions about suicide, and that fuels its horrendous stigma. Living here also gives the impression that suicide might as well have an entry on stuff white people like. Indeed, American and British statistics on this do indicate that out of those general populations, in other words, the cisgender population, white dudes are more likely to commit suicide. However, transgender-specific statistics in the US show that it's people of color who are suffering the most. Additionally, it's already established that the ripple effects of economic disadvantages disproportionately impact people of color because of systemic racism, especially anti-blackness in America, and disproportionately impact women because of systemic misogyny, thus hurting women of color worst of all. These factors can reduce or eliminate one's access to essentials such as safe, transliterate healthcare, and not just for transition, and safe legal employment that pays a living wage. The deadly feedback loops of discrimination consistently do the most damage to the most vulnerable members of a marginalized group. Letting our memorials include all of the ways transphobia kills will emphasize rather than distract from the challenges trans people face, particularly trans women of color. Speaking up about suicide and about health and economic issues is no deflection from what trans women of color are dealing with. They are part of what trans women of color deal with. Individual instances of extreme physical violence are part of the larger picture of transphobia. A laser focus on murder actually lets most cis people completely off the hook. It allows cis people to say to themselves, well, I would never do that. I would never shoot or stab or strangle someone for being trans. Therefore, I cannot possibly be transphobic. Therefore, I cannot possibly be participating in transphobia. We can't keep letting cis people get away with believing that they're not part of the problem, because this absolves them of all responsibility for being part of the solution. The overwhelming majority of cis people would never be physically violent towards a trans person. Deep down, they know they don't have to be. Why waste time and energy going out of your way to harm trans people when you can simply ignore us to death? When a trans person is murdered, you can't see the blood on your hands. So I'm asking cis people to please stop killing us, directly and indirectly. Trans people are dying of economic neglect and emotional neglect, as well as outright murder. It's up to cis people to change this.